Let's open with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for your great history of the Bible, the story of the Hebrew people, the story of Jesus Christ, and the story of the first followers. We look forward in this series to overviewing the whole Bible and giving each person an outline to begin thinking about stories they can tell in daily living from the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. How great Thou art. Amen. Well, this morning in our lesson, we're going to begin with the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and we are privileged to have this great, great book of the Torah, which is such a basis for our whole faith. And there are 3 sub-studies for the Torah. There is obviously the creation story. There's the monotheistic story, the story of Abraham and one God for all nations. And then there's the story of Moses and the Exodus and the giving of God's laws, the 10 Commandments. So as we look at the creation story, we have to really be in awe that our God is the creator of a great universe. We haven't even discovered the ends of our universe and the Milky Way and all the planets and all the stars. But we live on the visited planet, the earth. And God visited the earth, and the visitation of the earth is the creation story. And how in a 7-day period, God created the earth. And he created mankind in the 6th day of this story, and the 7th day is a day of rest. And so as we look at those 7 days, I like the term Yom, which is a Hebrew term that Herschel Hobbs used, a great teacher of the Bible. The word Yom refers to a period of time. So we can think of the creation story as introduced in Genesis as being 7 periods of time, and how those periods of time, it's interesting, are tied very closely to the periods of time that great scientists who are exploring the universe describe the same periods of time from the floods and the light and then the creation of mankind. Those same periods are ones that scientists agree today are the general periods of creation of the earth. And so as we think about those creation periods, it's very important to think about all of the days, but the most important day is the 6th day when God created man and woman. And he created Adam and Eve, and out of Adam he took a rib, and he created a helpmate, Eve. And what a wonderful time it is in the creation story that mankind was born into this universe. And how the story of Adam and Eve is so important, that the original sin was created in the Garden of Eden. And yet God would have a bridge for solving the sin of mankind. We see sin every day in our life, but we know that Jesus Christ, God's Son, was brought into this earth to help us with forgiveness of our sins and give us a bridge to forgiving our sins. And so also Adam and Eve are the original procreators of mankind, and how it is very important that they were married, and the marriage of Adam and Eve is a model that is used throughout history for man and woman joining together and procreating and beginning children, and how important children are in our lives today, and how important the model of a man and woman creating children is really the best model for the procreation of mankind and the growing up of children. And that is socially proven today in many social studies. So we have the wonderful creation story, and we have that God created the man, and he created this universe that we live in, visited our planet, and we are so blessed to live in such a special, special planet. And how important ecology is today, that we must really protect our environment, and we must be careful to protect our streams and not pollute our planet. It's a very, very special planet that God created, and we have to really admire that. The second story is the story of Abraham. Now, Abraham was viewed as the person who founded monotheism. Monotheism is the idea of one God. And as Abraham comes on the scene, there are many gods who are worshipped. But Abraham in Genesis 12 would say that he is created, and out of Abraham will come many great nations, and they will all be monotheistic nations. We have three great monotheistic faiths, one God faiths at this time, that were all born out of Abraham. That would be the nation of Israel, the Hebrew nation of Israel, the nation of Islam, and of course Christianity, where we believe that God's only Son was Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit that is left for us today. So these three great monotheistic faiths were born out of Abraham and his belief that there is one God. And out of Abraham, of course, by his maidservant Hagar came Ishmael. And Ishmael is generally thought of as the founder of Islam. But Abraham would be the person who was a special, special person on the scene of God, for he brought monotheism and the idea that there is one God. And then we have, out of Abraham comes Abraham's patriarchal family, and that's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And Jacob is the father of 12 sons by 4 wives, and those 12 tribes become the great tribes of Israel. But under Jacob is Isaac, and Isaac had his sons. And so we have Jacob being a person that is so very important in our history. And the other person in the patriarchal period that we perhaps need to spend some time with is Job. Now, Job was not a part of the patriarchal family, but Job taught us the importance of loving God even though we have difficulties. The whole idea of divine retribution, that this was a theory of the Hebrew people, that if you were good, you had good results, but when you were bad, there were bad things that happened to you. But Job changed that with the idea of divine retribution. And so in Job 19:25, he says that he will stand upon the earth, and I know that my Redeemer lives. And so he knows that in good times and in bad times, we have a Redeemer, and that Redeemer is our God and Jesus Christ. And so then we move to the Exodus period, which is such a very important period, and that is the story of Moses. We all know the story of Moses, that he was born into a Hebrew wife, but he was put into a basket and floated on the river Nile. And who should discover this precious Moses, but it would be a patriarchal daughter of the Pharaoh. And so the Pharaoh's daughter raises Moses, and we can think of the life of Moses in 3 major periods. The first 40 years were that he grew up in the Pharaoh's court and became a very favored person in the Pharaoh's court. But then he strikes a blow at age 40. He kills a Pharaoh soldier, and then he goes into what is called his solitude in Midian. And that's where he shepherds sheep. And Moses then is shepherding sheep, but he feels a call from God. And the call is to come back and to rescue and redeem the nation of Israel, which is under slavery under the Pharaoh's term. And so the great story of Moses leading the nation of Israel and the Hebrew people out of slavery is a wonderful, wonderful story. And it's told in the book of Exodus. And probably one of the principal stories in the book of Exodus from Moses is the giving of the 10 Commandments, and how important the 10 Commandments are for our lives today. And it's interesting that surveys will show that fewer than 20% of Christians who go to church regularly can know or repeat the 10 Commandments. So as a follower of Jesus Christ, I've always felt it was important to understand and organize the 10 Commandments. My system for organizing the 10 Commandments is to think of the first 4 commandments as commandments where we love God. The transition commandment, the 5th commandment, is to honor our parents and to love our parents. And then the next 5 commandments are about learning to love our neighbor. So if you want to create an outline for the 10 Commandments, think about the first 4 as loving God, and that's what our book is about, loving God and loving our neighbor. So the first commandment is that God wants us to have no idols or no other gods before him. The second commandment is that there are no names that we should assign to other people other than the name of God. The third is the idea of keeping the Sabbath holy, and that we have no other God to worship on the Sabbath. And so then the transition commandment comes to love our parents. And the 5th commandment is to honor our mother and father. And that is one of the joys of my life, is that I have always been able to honor and love my parents. And to both of their deaths, I can honestly feel that I was always in honor of my parents. And that's an important lesson for all of us to learn. And then we move into commandments 6 through 10. The idea of we shall not murder, we shall not commit adultery, we don't steal, we don't bear false witness, and then we don't covet our neighbor's possessions. So think of the 10 Commandments and commit those, because in the Bible it is said that parents are to impress the 10 Commandments upon their children and to help them to learn the 10 Commandments. So now we have really walked through the first 3 great studies from the Torah, the story of God's creation of the great universe and the visited planet that we live upon. The story of monotheism in Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, and how Joseph went to Egypt, was almost killed by his brothers, and then he showed them forgiveness when they came to Egypt. And then the 400 years that occurred from the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph to the coming of the Exodus and Moses, and how during that 400 years the Hebrew people were put into slavery in Egypt, and yet Moses would be the person in the Exodus that led them out of Egypt into their freedom and gave us the 10 Commandments. But Moses never really was able to occupy the Holy Land. And that will be our next study as we study the book of Joshua and the Judges and many other stories from the Old Testament. So we leave the initial story from the Torah about these important patriarchal people. We are so blessed by the beginning of our faith and the cornerstone that is based upon. How great thou art.